Hello there. I wanted to do a program after my recent experience, which was incredibly, I think, has been incredibly helpful or almost life changing. And the topic is going to be the presence of God, as mysterious as it is, His providence. And I'm going to try to say something about this presence of God and how very mysteriously all the events in our life and the whole world, even evolution, creation, the different animals and things, are incredible manifestations of this omnipotent being, God, who is there. I think Dorothy Day, the Catholic activist whose book, The Long Loneliness, I am rereading after many years, talks of God as a terrible God. Uh, if that's what she said exactly, which I don't really remember, sort of what some sort of paraphrase of what the letter to the Hebrews says. It is a terrible thing to fall into the hands of an angry God, but I don't think that's exactly what Dorothy says or meant. What I mean is that in creating us, God has not made it easy for anyone or anything. So part of the great mystery is the mystery of suffering and the mystery of what to do about it and how to understand God when He allows so much suffering or even maybe causes it. So I've been going through a period, as many people have during COVID, etc., where helpful life supporting activities and social events were reduced, more for some than others. And just the tension and the political situation and so many other incredible problems with the weather, etc. I got into maybe some bad habits too, but a kind of rebellion against God that I've had in the past, and a real struggle. I was reminded of Jacob's struggle, wrestling with God. I tried to write another version of my autobiography called something like Jacob's Struggle or something. And what I wanted to talk about was this recent experience, which is like it's like a booster shot or a refresher course or a second boot camp or even a second honeymoon at the end of the day, because a couple of things happened that were very interesting. Or actually, I have three things that I think are interesting. The first was this great wedding that we had been planning for months. I bought my ticket in March, over 7 months before the wedding. This is the wedding of probably the person I love the most, next to his sister, maybe. Uh, a young man that I consider my nephew. He's 27. I've known his father since we were 7 years old, over 60 years. So I've seen all his four children be born and grow, but my attachment was to the daughter. when she was born in 84. And then when Michael was born in 93, I was in Spain. His father got me a ticket in 98 when Michael was 4.5. I was living in Rome doing my biblical theology studies. His father got me a ticket to visit, I think during Easter break in 98, came to the airport with Michael to pick me up, and said to Michael, "This is Emilio." Uh, Michael had seen me before, or maybe not even, because I was really in Rome and then, well, Spain, and then for a period I was in Miami, but he was very, very young. "Say you love him, kiss him." And of course, that completely captured my heart. And he coming along 9 years after his sister, this was my new love. So we all prepared for this incredible wedding. Michael has blossomed into quite a young man, and found a beautiful wife. So all my old friends who I grew up with, a whole bunch of us, or at least a good, more than half a dozen, we get together. We like to have a good time. The wedding consists of a big reception the day before, the 28th, in this sort of rustic, sort of like a barn. I think it's called Stablegate Barn or Farm, near Albany. Beautiful, beautiful weather. And there's this fantastic reception buffet. And I'm seeing all these people, including many friends of Michael. He has a lot of great friends that adore him, whom I knew when they were very little. I wouldn't remember any of them, but at the end, two witnesses came to me and said, "We remember you when you would go into Michael's room when we were there." And Michael was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, etc. So that was, but right in the beginning of this reception, I see this man looking a little scholarly, and I approach him. We approach each other, and it turns out that he identified himself as the uncle of the bride, but also his name immediately made me remember that he was my law colleague in a law firm in 1987. So, what are the chances of that? He's an uncle by marriage of the bride. So, all of a sudden, in a sense, and I start telling everybody this, and of course, the young people say, "That's crazy. How can you run into a guy like that, the uncle, and then all these other people and incredible, interesting young people, friends, etc." And all of a sudden, the atmosphere, for me anyway, but for everybody, sort of changes, or I perceive a thing in the atmosphere of incredible love and connectivity between all these people, among all these people that love Michael, love Cassie, his wife. I'm with people that I've known for 60 plus years, a lot of them, his children, of course, other friends, other people. And so it doesn't get any better than that, socially or relationship wise. The food was good, the drinking was good, a great night in the middle of in this beautiful location. I mean, Michael and Cassie planned this thing, um, incredible. Then the wedding itself takes place, and it's not a religious celebration per se. I saw the name of the officiant, and I said, this is a Hindu name. And in fact, it was a young uh, lady of Indian descent. And it was all, of course, one of these exchange of vows type of thing, composed by, I think, the parties themselves. Uh, Very, very beautiful and meaningful and from the heart. And then when the officiant began speaking, she talked of them both, but in regards to Michael, referred to him as a blessing. Now, many years before, when he was in St. Agnes Academy in Key Biscayne, when he was probably 7 or maybe 8 years old or something, one of his teachers said to me, he is a blessing. So just like the Bible, when you have these binary combinations of the two witnesses, you have this sort of a complementation or uh, confirmation of a reality. You know, Moses and Elijah, transfiguration, etc. And so when these things occur and one is perceptive, you have to be blind, dumb, and everything else not to perceive it. You have this sense of this love in the air, which is also the presence of God. So that the wedding itself, of course, was incredible. Dancing and drinking and celebrating in this barn place. Uh, Incredible events. And it was a beautiful, beautiful night. And we took the shuttle back to the hotel where a good group of us were staying. And I had a sore throat. I asked my friend for some Zicam, and I took it throughout the night. I don't sleep very well. And I think it went away. So we have this afterglow of this wonderful wedding. And the next day I get up to get the Uber to the airport. A friend of mine had picked me up when I first arrived, but he left very early in the morning to drive back all the way to Florida, which I should have been on that trip. I was supposed to go with them from Florida to Albany to the wedding. I decided to fly. The big attraction for the driving was to go to Niagara Falls, which I had never been to, nor had Henry and Donna gone to. But they canceled that, so the big attraction to go driving was not there. We weren't going to go see Niagara Falls, simply drive to the wedding, which I thought going by plane was a lot quicker. Well, I get to the airport. I get my flight from Albany to Philadelphia. They changed my flight, American Airlines, from Charlotte as the stop to Philadelphia. So we go in this little plane to Philadelphia, arrive in Philadelphia, 4 hours, later than scheduled originally. They changed the flight, the tickets anyway, my flights. So I eat, I sit down, I'm waiting for boarding. It's a minute before boarding. And they announce that the flight is canceled due to some weather in Seattle or a crew problem in Seattle. I mean, they could have probably announced it sooner. I don't know. So everyone goes to customer service, long line. I'm racking my brains as to what the best course is. I'm getting messages from American Airlines. Listen to this, that I can spend, I'm supposed to spend 2 nights in Philadelphia at some hotel. I don't even know where or what. And then fly to Chicago and spend another night there. And then get another flight in Chicago to Florida. Now that didn't make any sense, and Chicago to me is a nightmare. Originally, when I saw ORD, people in the line were saying that's Orlando, and then somebody pointed out, no, that's O'Hara in Chicago. Orlando would have not been so bad. I landed in Orlando. Of course, I was still after 2 nights in Philadelphia, but if I landed in Orlando, at least I could rent a car, drive down, whatever. So I said, that doesn't sound very good. Make a long story short, I get to the line, I get to customer service. I'm calling my friend who's driving, and I say, where are you exactly right now? And I think he said Charlotte, and I said, I'm going to try to get a flight to Charlotte. I'll be there in the morning, and I'll join you in the car, and we'll just go down, But there was no chance of that. And even if you got flights like the ones they said I was rebooked in, there's no way of trusting that. They eventually wound up canceling over 2,000 flights, so I knew enough to not do that. But still, I had to spend the night in Philadelphia. I get on my phone again, of course, and Google, Amtrak. Try to get a ticket. They're sold out. Go in again, and I do buy a ticket for $156, Philadelphia, West Palm Beach, 24-hour train ride the next day. So I take an Uber to the Quality Inn in West Chester, Philadelphia. It's a, $30 or $40 Uber ride at my expense. I spend the night in a not very nice Quality Inn, especially in the middle of nowhere. The next day, the front desk tells me that I can take a short Uber ride to the local Amtrak, and from there go by train to the main Amtrak in Philadelphia and save a little money on the Uber. So I do that, and I get to the Amtrak, the local Amtrak, and it's Sunday, and they don't go to Philadelphia. They're not even open. And the trains are not gonna help me at all when they pass, which I didn't see any pass or anything like that. So I have to take another Uber from there. Call a guy, Uber shows up and goes, oh, I don't go to Philadelphia, so they cancel that ride. So then I got another ride to get to the downtown Philadelphia Amtrak. I'm told that there's a 12:30 train instead of a 5 o'clock train, but it arrives at basically the same time, so there's no point for me to be in a train even longer than 24 hours. So I know I have to be I'm doing a 9 to 5 at the Amtrak train station, just spending 8 hours sitting there, eating some things, going to the bathroom, reading, trying to survive this thing. Finally, 5 o'clock comes, and I get on the train. And it's not pleasant being on a train 24 hours, but when halfway through the train stops and says there's another train in front of us with an engine on fire, and we're going to be delayed maybe an hour and a half, hopefully. It turns out to be more like a 3-hour delay. And then they say the fire truck that put out the fire is stuck on the tracks, so now we are waiting for a tow truck to come and remove the fire truck. And that's not the only delay that took place. Very hot in the train, cool, very cool in the area next to the table area next to the where they sold drinks or food, etc. So I would be reading there in nice light. Go back. I mean, you have to kill, almost 30 hours on this train. And I'm thinking, everything has gone wrong. Beautiful wedding. All of a sudden now you have this letdown. And the whole shebang affects me. I'm thinking, what, these crews don't want to work. The Uber lady told me that this was a protest, or actually, yes, a protest against the vaccine mandate, that the deadline was coming up or they'd be fired or something. Excuses about the weather, which really I don't think were applicable, and just crazy rebookings that meant nothing because, first of all, they were crazy to go from if you're going to Florida to be in Philadelphia to go to Chicago and then to Florida, and you're going to be canceled anyway. I would have been, if I had made it to Chicago, which was crazy, I would have been in limbo in Chicago. So I felt desolated. My friends were, very upset about it and helped trying to console me on the phone, etc. But it was a purification experience. It was an experience of the situation of the world and of this terribleness of God, who is educating us, disciplining us, teaching us, correcting us. I have articles on my website regarding this Musar or Paideia, where God, disciplines us so that we are purified. Now, this almost sounds maybe even corny. It is not corny. It is exactly what happens. And we experience it as a great bath, purification. I just took a very good shower and I shaved after a couple of days, more than a couple of days of, you know, um, of being without much energy to do very much. And you feel rejuvenated so that you experience this God in the background, this hidden God of Isaiah. I think it's 55, and he says that truly you are a hidden God, or the God of Israel. And you at the same time get these love vibes, and the terribleness of God doesn't go away, but you get more in tune with God, and you remember Jesus, which is really God's answer to the suffering, etc. Meaning, God is apparently apparently God could not create. There's no such thing, or in fact, maybe he could have created some sort of non-suffering world, which is incredibly difficult to imagine, but um, the fact is that in creating a material universe with evolution and the emergence of humans, built into all this is this fragileness and this need for God. And it's beyond, suffering brings you to God, which in many ways it does, and all the saints suffered quite a bit. But it's actually this mystery of suffering which places us in this situation where our choice, our two paths, so to speak, life and death, God or no God, love or no love, becomes more stark. And so my rebellion against God, thinking, I think you made a mistake creating us. Why did you impose creation on people that suffer? Why don't you give them a choice, etc.? My first reaction has been to say you have to accept it because there's no other way. You might as well enjoy this ride because you don't have a choice. But it's not just resignation. It's actually, again, getting in tune with God in such a way that you become more humble. I came back from my trip and I record this Italian program, Christianity, early Sunday morning, 6 hour difference in Italy. And I watch the Mass there a lot of times. I'm going back to church. I have my booster and everything. I'm going back to my church this Saturday. But one of the first things I hear is from this priest, uh, Italian. Humility is probably the first virtue. So once we humble ourselves and accept what God is doing in this background so powerfully with this sort of mixture of, consolation, tribulation, optimally mixed, so to speak. And you have, with my background that I've had these experiences in the past, it builds up on it. It's almost like a booster. The booster is after you have already had uh, other shots. So it builds up your immunity. In this case, it builds up your development of your relationship to God, but with this humility where the hiddenness of God and your own hiddenness is more solid. And so you can get, again, more in tune. And then all the things that sort of were dormant and you had neglected, and all the readings and experiences you've had in your life are subsumed, are included in your new perspective. But as the mystics teach, the higher emotionalism of a lower rank in the mystical journey to God, this emotionalism, and I would say both, ecstatic or happy and or euphoric, and the despondency, sadness, emotionalism, that is leveled, and you are more equanimous, but at the same time more uh, filled with love of God and neighbor. Then, of course, I record, various programs, including a Spanish program called Aquí y Ahora, Here and Now. And a lot of times I don't watch, it's repetitive, some things, whatever, about the migrants. But this time I watched it all regarding what the migrants from Central America and even South America go through to try to get to the United States. Journeys through forests, this Darien place in Panama where they couldn't build the Pan American Highway, how they are then victims of bandits that take everything, their jewelry, they mistreat the women, they steal the money. And you say to yourself, I went through a harrowing train trip, but these people are really reduced to nothing. And therefore you do hear from all of them, basically, God, with God's help, etc. They are in tune with God. And it's beyond the politics of are we being invaded or anything like that. Some people watch certain channels that they talk about this big problem of the invasion. I say, when was the last time one of these immigrants assaulted you or something? These are people seeking to survive. Look at the Haitians. Earthquakes, storms, you name it. It's a human thing to try to do an exodus from Egypt. It's in the Bible. That's why the Bible, the Torah says, you shall love the Ger, the resident alien, because you were resident aliens in Egypt. You shall love the soul, I think it says, the nefesh of the Ger. So that you become simpler in your philosophy of things, and you can intuit or have insight right into the essence of situations. That's what Jesus did. You don't calculate a political or economic or some other human elucubration or calculation or reasoning, but then you have to have the prudence of implementing your love. You can't just be crazy. You have to be prudent, like the virgins with their lamps, etc. But nevertheless, you have a new insight after, and that's really an important biblical word. The verb sakal is what the first thing that is said about the servant in Isaiah 52. Hine abdi yaskil, I think it says, behold, my servant shall prosper, they translate. Isaiah 50, yeah, 52, not exactly prosper. He will have insight, which is exactly what Eve thought the fruit in the garden was good for. Not for wisdom, that's another word. Insight. Insight. And the followers of the servant, the maskilim in Daniel 11:33, 35, and 12:3 and 12:10, these wise teachers, which I don't like that translation, but it's hard to translate it, these are the insightful ones who follow the same sort of process as the servant. He learned obedience through what he suffered, says the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 5. Even Jesus was disciplined twice by Pilate in Luke, I think it's 22. I shall discipline him, scourge him, and release him. You can't get away from this. Once you understand this, how the game works, you can play it a lot better. And in our case, as Christians, we can be sure of winning. A little bit like Benigni says in the movie Life is Beautiful, which some people objected to. I think Spielberg didn't like the humorous treatment of concentration camps. But there's still a message there. We won. It's like, well, it's like the resurrection in a way, but it's like these crime shows I watch where a criminal does a terrible thing to a victim, and the family suffers enormously, but then when they catch the criminal and condemn him, not only is there closure, but there's some sort of sense of victory, which is kind of very ironic. Victory would have been no suffering whatsoever, but the way we are educated, corrected, disciplined, led by God, is that we see this hope after the suffering, or we see this positive aspect, or this consolation after the tribulation, and the effect of that is, like I said, like a booster. It strengthens us. I can do all things in God who strengthens me, Philippians, etc. So that all these things you perceive if you have any kind of meditative inclination. The book that I mostly read, and I finished it because I had so much time, is basically the autobiography of Eddie Fisher. And it's a study in kind of what happens if you sort of rebel kind of till the end. I'm not judging Eddie, but I identified with a lot of what he did and didn't do. He was incredibly poor, Jewish kid in New York. Father was mean. He had a great voice, and he went out singing, and it went to his head. He mentions that he thought he was kind of like God, that he could do anything. And then in this adventure, he brags all the time about women. That's really not my case, but he had a lot of women, and finally, of course, marries Debbie Reynolds, that he seems to have hated. Accuses Debbie Reynolds often of being a hypocrite, but winds up admitting what a great hypocrite he's been. So his main accusation against Debbie is mute. Then, and he says that was all a sham, it was all publicity, and there was no love or anything. She apparently had the principles to love him and to give him chances to come back, and he didn't take them, and he also did not pay attention to his children, just as I could do more and could have done a lot more with my other nephews from my brother and sister, unlike the niece and nephew, even super niece, super nephew of my friend's children. So that he leaves Debbie, as you know, marries Elizabeth Taylor. Now, Elizabeth Taylor seems to have been a very passionate, adventurous woman. Uh, she had married probably her great love, Michael Todd, Eddie's best friend, Jewish. Michael Todd is killed in an airplane crash. So Eddie takes over until Richard Burton comes along. So now you have another match there. Elizabeth and some other man, kind of like at her level. Violent, turbulent relationship. And then Eddie spins off into drug addiction. There's a doctor, Max Jacobson, who injects people. He mixes up all these things. I talked about God mixing up things for our good. Isn't it interesting that it sort of in the background, but it now clearly occurs to me that what Max Jacobson was doing was the opposite in sort of an evil sense. He made you feel good. A lot of it was methamphetamine he was injecting you with, maybe some vitamins, other things. Eventually, all this collapsed. Max Jacobson became, he killed some people, and he with injections, and he himself went to ruin physically and professionally and in every way. And Eddie Fisher became a super addict of methamphetamine, and then switched to cocaine injection, and then to cocaine snorting because of he had no veins anymore. And to the end, he said, "No God, I rebel against God." He tries to have some relationship with Carrie Fisher, his daughter. His son Todd, named after Michael Todd, is a born-again Christian, as I understand it. Of course, Carrie died one day a couple of years ago, and the next day her mother died. I don't know how Eddie made it to 82, but he appears in this documentary of Debbie and Carrie, and it's pathetic how weak and kind of really beaten he was, even though he was lucky enough with all these women he had to finally find a woman. She seems to be a little naive, a Chinese woman, Betty Lin, who accepted him, took care of him. She would brush off Eddie's criticism of Debbie Reynolds. She had a very basic, no hang-ups type of approach. exactly what Eddie needed after all the wild stuff he had had. And there you would have God giving him the right person to at least console him at the end. And he dedicates the book to the only wife I've ever had. He actually married Connie Stevens too, and some other woman. He had about at least 4 marriages, 5 with this one, I guess. But he considers her the only wife he ever had, the last one. So all these thoughts came to me, and I wanted to share that as an experience of, again, the presence of God, the trials God can give us in the most astounding ways. After the high of a wedding, the low of the limbo of the cruelty of the airline, the lack of consideration and decency, maybe even of the employees too, and of the people that maybe manipulated them into thinking that vaccine is something to be wary about or refuse or maybe even take a stance. The Uber driver believed that. She said, I'm a microbiologist and this and that. And I said, well, did people ever do this with polio? Well, they studied really polio about the vaccine. You know, they haven't studied this one. And then she goes, then the vaccine can't, won't guarantee that you will not get COVID. And I said, well, you mean if you die in a car accident wearing your seatbelt, that the argument then is that it's irrelevant if you use a seatbelt or not because some people die with a seatbelt. So it's also jumbled. But you sort of move past that instead of being stuck with how stupid and manipulated so many people are, and I have to say that. You sort of accept the whole shebang. You accept that there's crazy people, cruel people, evil people, manipulated people, stupid people, that we have a lot of this ourselves in us, and we sort of let go and let God type of thing, as the Alcoholics Anonymous would say. So even the book was part of this mix that God gave me, and I think I don't need to go much further in this thing right now. I hope this is of use to people.